So let us return to our last visit. And I was about to say that there were other influential figures in the history of the philosophy of yoga. And by the way, that was a test video that I was trying out. And when I reviewed it, there was some very powerful information in there. And a lot of my videos, I'm not following a script. I do them spontaneously. These are just things that come out of me from the depths of my memory banks. And I found that that little grouping of items I was putting out there for you to absorb and learn from was pertinent enough for the keeping. So I went ahead and okayed the publication of that little 14, 16-minute amateurish looking, starting badly and noise in the background and then ending abruptly. But I think if you know me by now, and you should if you've watched all my videos, I'm not that worldly. I'm not impressed by finesse, or I'm not looking for an Academy Award for cinematography or editing or any of that. I can assure you, I'm just trying to get my point across any way I can, and that point is to hand over to you, in the course of the years I have left, all the knowledge I've accumulated on the subject of yoga philosophy. So as I was saying, I was about to say other influential figures, and the one I was about to list when I was, for whatever reason, I cut myself off, or I was cut off, it doesn't matter. The first one on the list would be Helena Blavatsky, 1831-1891. She was co-founder of the Theosophical Society. Her most famous writing was one called The Secret Doctrine, which incorporated Eastern spiritual concepts, including karma, meditation, and familiarities with West. Her work familiarized Western audiences with yoga philosophy. So she's early in the game still. She's very early in the game. The next one I was going to list, and I am listing now, is Paramahansa Yogananda. I'll just call him Yogananda. His autobiography, which is very famous, I read it early in life. I think I was in my 20s, late 20s, right after I got out of the Air Force. I read it for the first time. Autobiography of a yogi made yoga and meditation accessible to millions. Can you imagine? Back even in the 70s, he was reaching millions of people. He'd already passed at that point. Fusing ancient teachings with modern spiritual aspirations, and that is Yogananda. Paramahansa Yogananda, 1893-1952. Then Aldous Huxley, which you may have heard of if you've taken certain courses in college or even in high school. In his perennial philosophy, Huxley explored the universal truths underlying mystical traditions, including yoga, and he was an advocate for personal experience of the divine. He wanted to experience the divine and teach folks how to get to the level of personally experiencing contact with the divine. And then that brings us forward to contemporary voices, of which I know they're out there, but I didn't have time to research that as much as I wanted to in my note-taking, so I just listed myself, James Exum, Sakshi, 1950 to the present, and I'm very active within the multimedia yoga movement, and that's about as vainglorious as I'm going to get on the subject of myself, but I am making headways into the multimedia movement for teaching yoga on a very serious and scholarly level. And so in ending that section, I was going to say, and I'll go ahead and say it now, today yoga is a global phenomenon shaped by many voices, myself as an American author and video creator. I write under the pen name Sakshi. I try to exemplify the modern integration of yoga's timeless philosophy with the digital age through online media, through my narrated essays, and I explored yoga not just as a practice, but as a creative, communal, and personal journey. I draw upon the historical legacy of the greats of yoga like Patanjali and the philosophical depths of Schopenhauer and Emerson, and the psychological insights of one of my heroes of all time, Dr. Carl Jung. And the themes of these modern yoga discourses, of which I'm one of the speakers, there's several of us out there, and you run into them, I'm sure, when you're moving past mine. You see other people that are offering courses on yoga and expanded yoga knowledge at this point. Well, we want accessibility, yoga as an inclusive and adaptable practice for all. That's one of the themes of our discourses. We want authenticity, or I'm speaking now for myself, I want authenticity, honest self-inquiry, integration at diverse philosophical influences. I want interdisciplinary dialogue, connecting yoga with philosophy, psychology, and art, and I've been able to accomplish that to a minor degree in my 7 or 6 videos I've produced so far, wrote, produced, narrated, set the lighting, set the stage. I did everything. I have no one here with me. This is all on my lonesome self that these presentations come to you, good or bad or ugly, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I want the community to use yoga as a springboard for collective and creative expressions. I want the creativity of the community to get behind we teachers of yoga beyond the physical into the philosophical areas. I want to use yoga as a springboard for collective and creative expression amongst people in general. So from Patanjali's sutras to the reflections of Schopenhauer and Emerson, the psychology of Jung, these are my writings, I'm reading from my own notes, the psychology of Jung and the multimedia expressions of myself and others. Yoga's philosophy is a vibrant, ever-evolving conversation. Each generation, drawing from ancient wisdom and contemporary insight, continues the search for unity, meaning, and transformation. Affirming yoga not just as a historical legacy, but as a living path, adaptable to every age and culture, man, woman, and child, regardless of faith, regardless of creed or color. We're trying to reach out, hands across the nation, so to speak, to reach humanity in our quest for the expansion of the minds of my fellow human beings, to see the world not only from a physical viewpoint and a global viewpoint and a commercial viewpoint, which is overriding right now, the commercial aspects of advertisement and everything else. I'm not against it, I'm just saying it's out there and it's very strong. But I want to open this new door to those that have never knocked upon it, never even thought of knocking upon this door. I want to open a whole new area to those that might have interest and are willing to tread the razor's edge, as I call it, the path of yoga. So that's what I was going to say before I was so abruptly. I think I may have ran out of space on my phone. Again, this phone is new to me. Don't know if I did, don't know if I didn't. It doesn't matter. We're here now, and we're going on from where I left off. So let's see what I want to talk about next. Oh yes, here it is. I'm changing the notes here. I'm going to back up a little bit, backpedal to the Upanishads and their effect on philosophical yoga as a comparative study of ancient philosophy and spiritual traditions. You'll excuse me when I do that. I'm not burping I have mentioned in earlier videos that I suffer from a Parkinsonian disease. It affects my legs mostly and my left arm. With tremors, my legs, I have to do little baby steps. But that's okay. I've had this problem now for going on. I think I'm either 15 or 20 years. I don't I don't have a set time that I came down with it because it's not something I dwell on. So why should I worry about giving it a birthday or assigning it, as an exact day that it struck me? I know it's been years and years. So, under the heading of Upanishads and Philosophical Yoga, a comparative study of ancient philosophical and spiritual traditions, that's the name of this paper I wrote. It's copyrighted, my name, all rights reserved, but I will read from the text and voluntarily share it with you. And it begins with the Upanishads and the beginnings of philosophical yoga. We already talked about that. But we have not talked about, remember the title of this series, which this is number 5, is the world history of yoga. Well, we've talked about India. We went through all of that, starting with Adi Yogi, and we came forward and on and on and on. And then in the last, that sort of abrupt little, well, I'll go ahead and call it that bastard video that I produced, and went ahead and said, go ahead and publish it because there's data in there that everyone needs to hear, and it's good stuff. It may not be in the best format, but put lipstick on a pig is still a pig, as they say in the old South. But that's no pig of a video. That video there's some golden nuggets in there. If you can get past the formatting and the abruptness of it and how it just sprang out of nowhere, then you will learn from that one also. From that one. That was number 4 in this history series. This will be number 5, the last one, I'm hoping. Okay, so as I said, we started in India, then we came to America. We went through Europe a little bit, and then we came to America. But what we didn't do was show what haven't done so far is show this philosophical yoga and the Upanishads and their relationship to the rest of the world. I haven't done that. So in my notations here, I did a little homework for us, a little research, and I'm going to start, let's move around the world a little bit now. Let's go outside of India, let's go outside of Europe, let's go outside of the United States of America, and we'll just kind of move around here. But these places listed below and spoken of in the following paragraphs, moving towards the end of this video, the end of this series, we'll start with Greece. Well, if you're going to start with Greece and you're talking about the beginnings of philosophical yoga, then you're going to have to speak of the philosophers, the early philosophers, like we did in this series, the early people dealing with the philosophy of yoga. We're going to talk about the early philosophers of these nations that I'm beginning with as Greece, and then I'll go to China, I'll go to Persia, I'll go to Israel. These are the ancient nations, pretty much. So in Greece, we had philosophers like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, of course, who were laying the foundations of Western philosophy. Well, I'm bringing Eastern philosophy west. The Greeks were exploring concepts of ethics, metaphysics, and epistemology. China, they had Confucianism, Taoism, or Taoism, whichever way you want to pronounce it. And they were emerging as major philosophical and spiritual traditions. Confucius and Lao Shi were key figures in shaping Chinese thought. Now we'll move over to Persia, the early days. Zoroastrianism was the dominant religion, emphasizing duality of good and evil. We see all of these three have something in common. They're talking about ethics, they're talking about morals, they're talking about good and evil. So in their own ways, they're teaching what yoga teaches, principles of being a decent person while you're on the earth and seeking a higher goal at the end of your life. Zoroastrianism was the dominant religion, emphasizing the duality of good and evil. The teachings of Zoroaster, who Zoroastrianism is named after, influenced later religions and philosophical developments. Israel, the Hebrew Bible, was compiled forming the basis of Judaism. Prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah were shaping the religious and ethical landscape also. Very much so. Moses played a major role in that with the commandments. Now we're going to move over to Egypt, which was one of my very favorite lands as a child. I just loved Egypt. I got to go see the King Tut exhibit in New Orleans about 1980 or somewhere in there. It was wonderful. I got to stand in front of his little boy throne. It was a wonderful experience. The Egyptians had a rich tradition of religious and philosophical thought centered around the afterlife and the gods. The Book of the Dead and other texts provided insights into their belief. By contrasting the Upanishads and philosophical yoga with the activities and philosophies of these other major countries, I have and we can gain a deeper understanding of the global intellectual landscape during that time frame, that time period. Each of these traditions contributes to the rich tapestry of human thought and spirituality, offering unique perspectives on the nature of existence. And here's the one thing they all had in common: the pursuit of the truth. And then there's a list of philosophies and quotes and all of that. I'm just not going to get into that. It's just too much. And I'm trying to stay brief here, but I basically have covered the foundations of that. And I could go into other aspects of it, but I think I've covered it there. So now we will leave that paper that I wrote and we will travel forward to the lesson du jour. We left off with Jung, I believe, in that sort of bastardized. I'm using that in a classical sense. I'm not cussing. It was sort of born out of wedlock. It was just a wannabe episode. It was a bastard. It really didn't have two parents. The two parents would be my writing and logical sequence of appearance. Well, they didn't have the logical sequence. I just kind of overrode that. But again, I hope you enjoyed it regardless. So this paper that I'm working from now, I'm always writing new papers on different subjects. And what I've basically been doing so far is going either back to my book or one of my books or some of my papers or some of my narratives that I've written, narratives on paper, not audio narratives. And this one's called The Evolution of Yoga Philosophy from Patanjali to Emerson, Schopenhauer, Jung, and Contemporary Voices. A journey through time, thought, and practice. So this is what we're dealing with at this moment, and we're moving forward with it. Well, can you believe I've already used up almost 20 minutes? I only want this to be 30 minutes long. If it goes to a little longer, so be it. I want them to be short, concise, and sweet, and informative. But if they have to move past that deadline, so be it. You cannot. I used to have a saying in business, my business in particular, when customers would be moaning and groaning about the expediency of the delivery of the product, I would always say to them, well, you can't rush quality. Oh, I was a vain little rascal in those days. And again, you cannot rush knowledge, especially when it's inclusive knowledge such as this. So we've already talked about Patanjali and the classic foundation of yoga. We talked about that. One we skipped in there was one called Adi Shankara. He's about 788 CE, and he's very, very important. I'm going ahead and skip over him even now, and no disjustice to him, no disrespect. But again, he's so important, like the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. Adi Shankara deserves his own video, or maybe two or three. So we'll get to that later. We've done Schopenhauer, we did Emerson, we talked about him, those gentlemen in the last video. Sorry I'm being redundant here. We talked about Henry David Thoreau, we talked about Swami Vivekananda, and I started with Dr. Carl Gustav Jung, 1875-1961, and then I went forward with you a few minutes ago with Helena Blavatsky and Yogananda and Huxley and so forth and so on. And now we're back to almost the last page of this paper. And I basically already read this last page, so I suppose I'll just have to talk off the top of my head for the rest of this. Hopefully you've gained quite a bit from this history, from Adi Yogi up to Carl, Dr. Jung. That's a very wide range. And we have modern narrators that are experts. Some of them are swamis, some of them are well respected. I've left out Satchidananda. I mentioned him one time. I've left out several active teachers in India now, and they're book writers like myself, and they do videos. I'm at the back of the pack of that group, and I'm not competing. More power to them. If they're out there teaching ahead of me and the world is grasping their ideas and they like their style, more power to them. Because the word is being spread. It's like the 7 rishis of the 7 rishis of Adi Yogi, the first yogi. He sent those 7 men out in the world to spread the knowledge he had imparted to them. And these gentlemen and ladies are out there spreading the word ahead of me, and more power to them. Again, I'm not competing. This is not a competition. This is not the Olympics. And it's not a religion. So there is no competition. It's philosophy. And I said in one of my earlier videos, the worst thing philosophers can do to each other, or in anger, is maybe slap each other with a lily. I mean, that's about as violent as a true philosopher should ever become. I mean, how can you be a philosopher and drop down to the level of fisticuffs and rolling around in the gutters? I mean, that's not a philosopher. That's a ruffian, as we used to say. So I've traveled through this with you, and hopefully you've learned. And again, you can rewind and take notes, and turn on that little device that gives graphics to my words, whatever it's called. That little button that writes what I'm saying on the screen below or above the screen. That might be helpful, because my Charlestonian accent, and sometimes I speak beneath the subject by going off and saying something kind of under my breath, but it's also important what I'm saying there to listen to. But it's just a subtext. I don't know why I do that. Maybe my mom did that or my dad did it. I think it's the way the Exums speak. My last name is Exum. I think it's just a pattern. It's a family pattern, because I do remember others in my family would do that, and they would speak a little lower, and they're still on subject, but they're off on a tangent, and then they come right back. And as a child, I remember hearing maybe an uncle or maybe my mom or dad do that. And I noticed one thing about it. It would always catch my attention when they would do that. It would make me pay closer attention, because they weren't mumbling, they were just speaking in a lower volume of voice. And obviously, I utilize that. Over time, I've tried to rid myself of that, but it's ingrained in me, and it's part of the way I speak, just like the accent's part of the way I speak, and so be it. So here we are at almost 25 minutes into this video, and I think that's a good place to stop. So I hope you enjoyed this series. Covered a lot of territory. Review it at your leisure. And as always, I will say, be good to yourself, be good to others, spread the word about being good out there. And who knows, maybe in 10 years, we'll all wake up some morning and say, oh, what a wonderful world it is now. Goodbye, my friends, and I'll see you later.